I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who doubted her husband. Felt like such a far-off idea, something that happened to other people, not to us. We were a team. Noah and I had been together for 7 years, and every moment of it seemed as stable as the quiet hum of the life we'd built together. I loved him. Deeply. And I was sure he loved me too. We'd been through a lot. Moving cross-country for my job, spending weekends in different cities, navigating all the ups and downs that come with building a life together. If you'd asked me a year ago, I would have told you that I was one of the lucky ones. That I married the kind of man who made you feel seen. Like everything would be okay as long as we had each other. Noah was reliable, responsible, my rock. We had what everyone around us seemed to want. A home, stability, a future. We shared everything. The good, the bad, and even the mundane. How could I have known that, beneath it all, something was slowly unraveling? The first sign of trouble wasn't anything dramatic. It wasn't a fight or a glaring problem that knocked me off balance. It was just the small stuff. The little things you might miss if you weren't paying close attention. It started with the way he would disappear into his phone more and more. It wasn't like before. He used to keep it on the counter, out in the open. But lately it was always in his pocket, turned face down, even when he was home. The change was so gradual, so subtle, that I almost dismissed it. But every time he left the room with his phone in hand, a weird sensation would crawl down my spine. Sometimes I'd find myself staring at him, trying to figure out why everything felt different. Was it the way he paused before answering a question? The hesitation in his voice when he said, "I love you." The way his eyes seemed distant, as if he was thinking about something else, someone else? I wanted to believe it was just stress. The stress from work, from life. He had a lot on his plate. But there were nights when I'd catch myself staring at him, wondering if he was hiding something behind his smile, behind his laughter. And I would push the thought away. Asterisk, asterisk, don't be paranoid, don't be crazy. Asterisk, asterisk. But deep down I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. That something was shifting. One evening everything changed. We were watching a movie. One of those light-hearted rom-coms we'd seen a million times. Noah was laughing at the jokes, and I was curled up on the couch, nestled into him like I always did. I felt the familiar warmth of his arm around me. His steady presence. Felt like nothing could go wrong. And then his phone buzzed. It wasn't loud, but it was loud enough that I couldn't ignore it. I could feel my heart racing before I even looked. It wasn't like I was looking for something suspicious, but when his phone buzzed again and the screen lit up, I couldn't help myself. I glanced. There it was. A message from someone I didn't know. Asterisk, can't wait to see you tonight. Same place. Wear that dress I like. Asterisk. I don't know how long I stared at that message, but it felt like an eternity. My mind raced, trying to piece together what I had just read. Who was this person? And why was Noah getting messages like that? I quickly turned away, pretending I hadn't seen a thing. I didn't even mention it to him. Didn't ask who it was, what it meant, or why it was sent. Instead, I forced myself to keep my eyes on the screen, to laugh at the silly jokes. The words felt like they were coming from far away, as if I wasn't even present in the room. But in reality, I couldn't focus on the movie. I couldn't focus on anything except that message. That text. Who was she? What did it mean? And why had he never mentioned her? I didn't say a word. I didn't want to ruin the moment, ruin the night. But in my chest, my heart was hammering, a cold chill spreading through my veins. That small moment had shattered something inside me. The world suddenly felt very, very different. For the rest of the evening, Noah went about like nothing had changed. He was his usual self. Smiling, laughing, asking about my day. But I wasn't listening to him. Not really. I was trapped in my own mind, trying to process what had just happened. Why had I found that message? Was I just imagining things? Could it have been an innocent mistake? Noah kissed me goodnight, and I pretended everything was fine. I even told him I loved him just like I always did. But the words tasted like dust in my mouth. I climbed into bed, and it felt as if I was lying next to a stranger. That night I didn't sleep. Not a wink. I kept replaying the message in my mind, trying to convince myself it didn't mean anything. Maybe it was just a friend, colleague, a joke. But the more I tried to convince myself, the more I felt the weight of what I'd just discovered. I didn't know how to feel. Angry, hurt, confused. I didn't know if I should confront him, or if I should just wait and see if more signs appeared. But deep down I already knew something was wrong. I could feel it, pulling at the edges of my consciousness. A knot in my stomach that wouldn't go away. And then I realized something even more terrifying. I wasn't just wondering who this person was. I was wondering if I even knew the man I had married. The days after that night felt like walking through a fog. I went through the motions, getting up, going to work, pretending everything was fine. But inside I felt like I was constantly holding my breath, waiting for something to break. That message kept replaying in my mind, over and over. I tried to push it away, but the feeling of dread was always there, lurking just beneath the surface. Noah, for his part, acted completely normal. His charm was as effortless as ever. He'd ask about my day, crack jokes to make me laugh, and even go out of his way to bring me flowers one afternoon, something he'd done for years. But every time he kissed me or smiled at me, I felt an unfamiliar distance between us. The warmth I once felt now felt hollow, as if it was all a performance, a show put on for me to believe everything was still perfect. But I couldn't ignore the crack that had formed in the foundation of our relationship. It wasn't just the message. It was everything else, too. He started working late more often, and not just once or twice. It became a pattern. I'd make dinner, only to get a text from him saying, "Sorry, got caught up in work. I'll be late tonight." Or, "Something urgent came up. Don't wait up for me." First, I didn't think much of it. Work had been busy for him. He was climbing the ranks at his company, and I understood the demands. But it was the frequency that started to feel off. Weeks went by where he'd be gone every other night, coming home after 10 or even later. And when he did, his eyes always seemed a little too tired, a little too distant, like he wasn't entirely here. The man I married had always been present when he was home. But now I felt like he was fading out of reach, disappearing into some unknown world. And then there were the calls. I'd hear his phone buzz while we were eating dinner, and I'd glance over to see his hand twitch slightly, just enough to notice. The second he'd grab it, his expression would change. Something that looked like anxiety flickered across his face for just a moment. He'd always step out of the room when he answered, and I'd hear the same vague responses, the same hushed tone. The pattern was too clear to ignore. I started asking myself if I was just being paranoid. Was I imagining things? Could I be overthinking it all? Every time I told myself I would remember that first text message, the one that shattered my sense of trust. That feeling in my gut wouldn't let me rest. And so, I started paying closer attention. I didn't want to spy on him. I didn't want to become that person. But the small things, the missed calls, the late nights, the secrecy, began to haunt me. I couldn't help myself anymore. I felt like a detective, trailing him in my mind as he went about his day, trying to find a clue, a hint, something to either confirm my worst fears or set my mind at ease. One afternoon when I came home from work, I found him on the couch, his phone on the coffee table next to him. He was engrossed in some sports game on TV, so I stood there for a moment just watching him. I felt a rush of guilt for the idea that crossed my mind, but I pushed it aside. I reached down, grabbed his phone, and turned it over in my hands. There was no message on the screen. But something about the way it felt, cold and heavy in my palm, made my heart race. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Nothing. But I couldn't stop myself from unlocking it. It only took a second to see that he had several unread messages, more than I'd ever seen before. I skimmed through them quickly, my fingers trembling as I read, but I didn't find anything as immediately shocking as that first message. The text seemed harmless enough, nothing too obvious or revealing at first glance. But there was something in the tone, the words that seemed to say just enough without saying too much. One stood out. I miss you. Can't wait to hold you again. I won't be home until late tonight, but I'll make it worth your while. My stomach churned. I didn't know who this person was, but I couldn't ignore the clear intimacy in the words. This wasn't just a colleague or a friend. This wasn't business. I snapped the phone shut and put it back down before Noah noticed. I sat down on the edge of the couch, trying to steady my breath, my mind spinning. Every logical part of me screamed that I should confront him. I should demand answers right now. But the other part of me, the part that was scared to know the truth, told me to wait. Wait until I had more. But how much more was I willing to take before I finally acted? How much longer could I live in this limbo? Every passing day felt like a slow descent into something dark, something I didn't want to face. That night, Noah came home late again. He kissed me on the cheek like everything was normal and asked about my day. I couldn't bring myself to tell him the truth, about the phone, about the texts, about how my heart was breaking. Instead, I simply said, "I'm fine." But inside, everything was crumbling. I couldn't look at him the same way anymore. The man I thought I knew was slipping further away, and I wasn't sure how to hold on. I didn't sleep that night either. Instead, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my thoughts racing. I knew I was getting closer to the truth, but the closer I got, the more afraid I became. What if I found something I couldn't come back from? What if everything I thought was real had been a lie all along? And as I stared at the darkened ceiling, one question kept echoing in my mind. How much longer could I keep pretending I didn't know? It had been 2 days since I found that text on Noah's phone, and every minute since then felt like an eternity. I tried to tell myself I was overreacting, that maybe I had misunderstood the message, that there was a rational explanation for everything. But deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. The pieces were falling into place, and I couldn't pretend they weren't. The nagging feeling of betrayal was overwhelming, suffocating, and I couldn't stop wondering just how long this double life had been going on. How many times had he stood next to me, pretending like everything was fine while hiding something so huge, so profound? And if it had been going on for so long, was there anything left of the man I thought I married? Or had I just been living in a house of lies, a beautiful illusion built on deceit? That night I made a decision. I couldn't wait anymore. I couldn't keep ignoring the truth, pretending that everything was normal. Something inside me broke, and I knew that if I didn't confront him now, I would never have the courage to do it. Noah had just gotten home. His usual smile plastered on his face as he set down his briefcase and gave me a quick kiss on the cheek. He had no idea what was coming. "Hey," I said, my voice tight. "We need to talk." He looked up, surprised by the sudden seriousness in my tone. "What's going on? You okay?" I tried to steady myself, but the anger was already bubbling up inside of me. The fear, the heartbreak, it was all mixing together into something too heavy to ignore. "I'm fine," I lied, swallowing the lump in my throat. "But we need to talk about something." He paused, sensing the shift in my energy. "Okay. What's going on?" I took a deep breath, my mind racing as I looked at him. "I found something. Something on your phone." He froze just for a second, but it was enough for me to see the flicker of panic in his eyes. "What did you find?" His voice was casual, too casual. The tone felt rehearsed, like he was already preparing to lie his way out of whatever I had discovered. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I walked over to the coffee table and grabbed his phone. I held it out to him, my hand trembling ever so slightly as I handed it over. The silence stretched between us like a rope tightening, the tension so thick I could almost taste it. Noah took the phone, his fingers visibly stiff as he unlocked it. His eyes scanned the screen quickly, and I saw the muscles in his jaw tighten. He was stalling. He was buying time, trying to think of an excuse, an explanation that would make everything go away. But I wasn't going to let him. "Who is she?" I asked, my voice shaking with the weight of the question. "Who is the woman you've been texting?" He looked up at me, and for the first time I saw the mask crack. There was no denying it. I had caught him. His face went pale. his lips pressed into a thin line. I could see the guilt swirling behind his eyes, but he still refused to acknowledge it. "She's just a colleague, babe," he said, his voice far too calm for someone who had just been caught in a lie. "Nothing more. You're overthinking this." My heart hammered in my chest. "A colleague," I repeated, my voice rising with disbelief. "A colleague doesn't send texts like that, Noah. A colleague doesn't tell you they miss you and can't wait to hold you again. A colleague doesn't." I stopped myself, realizing how much I had already said, how much I had already exposed. He looked at me, his eyes full of frustration. "It's not what you think, okay? This is all a misunderstanding. I swear." He ran a hand through his hair, the tension in his shoulders clear. I shook my head. "You can't just keep lying to me. Not anymore." For a moment he stayed silent, as though he was weighing his options. I could see it in his eyes. He was trying to figure out how to spin this, how to make it sound like nothing more than a small mistake. But deep down I knew the truth. I knew that this was more than just a mistake. This was a deliberate betrayal, a calculated decision to deceive me. "I didn't mean for you to find out this way," Noah said quietly, his voice softer now, almost apologetic. "But it wasn't sincere. Could tell. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. Please just let me explain." I crossed my arms, my chest tight with a mixture of anger and hurt. "Explain. Explain what, Noah? Explain how you've been lying to me this entire time. Explain how you've been seeing someone else behind my back, all while I've been here, trusting you." He took a step toward me, but I held my ground. I couldn't let him get close to me. Not after everything. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "I never meant to hurt you. It's complicated." "Complicated," I repeated, my voice rising in disbelief. "You've been living a double life, Noah. That's not complicated. That's betrayal." His eyes flickered with a mix of shame and guilt, but he still didn't come clean. He couldn't. He wasn't ready to admit the full extent of his lies. And I knew deep down that he wasn't going to be honest with me, not unless I forced him to. "I never wanted to hurt you," he said again, his voice small now, like he was trying to make me believe his words. "I was just confused. I didn't know what I wanted, and then I met her, and things just got out of hand." His confession hit me like a slap. He was still minimizing it, still trying to make it sound like some innocent mistake. "Don't you dare try to blame this on me, Noah," I snapped, my voice trembling with emotion. "This isn't my fault. This is your choice. You chose to lie to me. You chose to hurt me. And I don't think I can ever forgive you for that." For the first time in this conversation, I saw real emotion on his face. The shock, the regret, and the fear all came crashing down on him at once. But it was too late. The damage had been done. The trust that once held us together had shattered, and I didn't know how to fix it anymore. The next few moments felt like a blur. Noah tried to reach for me, but I stepped back, away from him. I couldn't bear the thought of him touching me right now. Not when I felt so disgusted, so betrayed. "I need time, Noah," I said quietly, my voice breaking. "I need time to think. I can't do this right now." And just like that, the distance between us became wider than ever. The man I had loved, the man I had trusted with everything, was no longer the same. And I didn't know who he was anymore. I spent the next few days in a daze, lost in the storm of emotions crashing around me. The betrayal, the shock, the utter disbelief. It all blended together into a murky haze I couldn't escape. Noah was gone most of the time, avoiding me as though he could pretend that nothing had happened, that we could go back to pretending like everything was fine. But I couldn't ignore it. I couldn't just sweep this under the rug. The truth had been revealed, and now I was left to pick up the shattered pieces of my life. I walked around the house like a ghost. The house that had once felt like a home now felt like a prison, a constant reminder of the life I had thought I knew. Every corner I turned, every object I touched, seemed to have a memory attached to it. I saw his face in every room, heard his laughter in the empty spaces, felt his absence in the silence. The kitchen, once a place where we'd share our morning coffee and talk about our day, felt like a foreign land. I couldn't even make my usual cup of tea without feeling a wave of anger wash over me. Every mundane task felt like a mountain to climb. How could I go back to doing these things when everything had changed so drastically? I wasn't just angry at Noah. I was angry at myself. Angry for not seeing the signs sooner. Angry for trusting him when I should have been more cautious. But more than anything, I was angry at the version of myself that had believed in fairy tales. The version that had thought I was immune to betrayal. How naive I had been. The worst part was the doubt. Every time I tried to move forward, to push through the fog of confusion, I was hit with another wave of uncertainty. Was I overreacting? Was I blowing things out of proportion? The guilt was suffocating. I couldn't escape it. And yet, deep down, I knew I couldn't forgive him for what he had done. Not yet. Not until I fully understood why he had done it. The emotional pain was unlike anything I had ever felt before. It wasn't just about the lies, though those cut deeply. It was about the destruction of my sense of self. For years, I had defined myself as the wife of Noah. Our love had been my anchor, my identity. But now that anchor had been torn away, and I was adrift, lost in a sea of questions and hurt. I didn't tell anyone about what had happened. Not at first. The thought of explaining it all, of reliving the betrayal in front of others, felt unbearable. I wanted to pretend like everything was fine. But the people closest to me, my friends, my family, they all sensed something was wrong. I received calls and messages, but I ignored them. I couldn't bring myself to talk to anyone. It wasn't that I didn't want to share what I was going through. I just didn't know how. I didn't want their pity or their judgment. What I needed was space. Time to process the wreckage Noah had left behind. It was during one of those lonely nights, when I found myself staring at the darkened windows, that I had a moment of clarity. For the first time I stopped thinking about Noah, stopped thinking about what had gone wrong between us. Instead, I thought about myself. I had spent so many years defining myself by my relationship with him, by the life we had built together. But what about me? Who was I when I wasn't his wife? The realization hit me like a lightning bolt. I had been so consumed by the image of us as a perfect couple that I had lost sight of who I was as an individual. I had forgotten what it meant to be me. It wasn't just about surviving the betrayal. It was about reclaiming my identity, my autonomy. That night I made a decision. I wasn't going to let this define me. I wasn't going to let this destroy me. But healing wasn't a simple switch I could flip. It didn't happen overnight. In fact, the road ahead felt like a winding, rocky path that I wasn't sure I could navigate. There were moments when the anger would rise again, when the tears would fall without warning, when the memories of Noah would flood my mind and I would be right back at square one. But there were also small moments of clarity, moments where I would look at myself in the mirror and realize that I was still whole, that I was still strong, that I was still capable of moving forward. It was in those small moments that I began to heal. It wasn't the grand gestures or the dramatic breakthroughs. It was the quiet steps, the slow and steady process of putting one foot in front of the other day after day. I started journaling again, something I hadn't done in years. I wrote about my feelings, my doubts, my fears. I let it all out on paper, uncensored and raw. It didn't make the pain go away, but it helped me process it. It gave me a way to express what was inside me without the fear of judgment. I also began to focus on the things that had always brought me joy. I went for walks in the park, something I used to do every weekend with Noah. I went out for coffee with friends, not to talk about Noah or the betrayal, but to remind myself that there was life beyond this pain. I rediscovered old hobbies, things I had put on the back burner while I focused on my marriage. Slowly, I was reclaiming pieces of myself that had been buried under the weight of betrayal. But the hardest part, the part one wasn't sure I could ever forgive, was Noah. Every time I thought about him, the anger would flare up again. How could he do this to me? How could he throw away everything we had for someone else? I still didn't know the full truth. I didn't know how long this double life had been going on. I didn't know if he had ever truly loved me, or if I was just a convenient part of his life that he could use and discard when it suited him. The questions lingered, unanswered and painful, and I wasn't sure if I would ever find the closure I needed. But one thing I knew for sure. I wasn't going to let him break me. I wasn't going to let him have the power to control my happiness anymore. As the days passed, I began to see glimpses of a life that could exist without Noah. It wasn't easy, but it was possible. And that was enough for me, at least for now. I wasn't ready to let him back into my life. But I was ready to move forward. And with each passing day, I grew stronger. Not just because I was healing, but because I had learned how to stand on my own 2 feet again. A month had passed since I had first uncovered the truth about Noah's betrayal, and things were still far from settled. The world around me felt like it had been turned upside down, yet there was this strange, subtle shift within me. It wasn't that the pain had gone away. Far from it, but I was starting to find a way to live with it. The hardest part was that Noah was still in the picture, even though our relationship had been shattered beyond repair. We hadn't filed for divorce yet, but it felt inevitable. In the meantime, we were living in this strange limbo, neither together nor apart. He would come home late at night, retreat to the guest room, and I would sleep in the bedroom, trying to pretend that nothing had changed. But everything had changed. I couldn't stop thinking about the future. How was I going to move on from this? What would my life look like without Noah? The questions plagued me, and yet there was something empowering about the uncertainty. For the first time, I realized that I wasn't just asking myself, what if I can't get through this? But instead, how can I make it through this, stronger than before? I spent time reflecting on the life we had shared, not just the betrayal but the moments that had once made me feel loved, supported, and happy. The first time we met, the way he had made me feel like the center of his world. Those memories were important. They shaped who I was and who I had been with him. But as much as I had loved those moments, I had to acknowledge that they no longer defined me. As much as I was still angry at Noah, I began to realize that there was no point in holding on to the past. The pain, the anger, it was suffocating me, and I knew that if I didn't learn how to let go, it would consume me completely. I wanted to heal, but for that to happen I had to forgive. Not Noah, not yet, but myself. I had spent so long blaming myself for not seeing the signs, for not recognizing the cracks in our marriage before it all came crashing down. But I had to remind myself that I wasn't the one who had betrayed us. I wasn't the one who had chosen to live a double life. I had trusted him and he had broken that trust. But the responsibility for that lay with him, not with me. So, as hard as it was, I started to forgive myself. I let go of the guilt that had been weighing me down. It wasn't easy, and there were days when I still felt like I should have done something differently, but I knew that forgiveness was the key to my healing. If I could let go of that guilt, I could finally start to rebuild the life that I deserved. I began to focus more on myself, something I had neglected for so long. I took time to rediscover my passions, my hobbies, the things that had made me feel like I was more than just a wife. I signed up for yoga classes, something I'd always wanted to do but had put off. I joined a book club, started reading books I'd been meaning to read for years. I reconnected with old friends, people I hadn't seen in ages but who had always been there for me. One evening I sat with my best friend, Sarah, at a quiet cafe. She had been there for me since the beginning, offering support, even when I didn't know how to ask for it. As we sipped our drinks, she looked at me with a thoughtful expression. "You're different," she said, a slight smile on her face. "I know it's been hard, but I can see it. You're stronger now. You're not the same person who was blindsided by Noah's lies." I smiled weakly. "I don't feel strong. I feel like I'm just trying to survive." "You are," she replied, her voice full of conviction. "But you're also learning how to thrive again. That's what matters." Her words struck me deeply. It was the first time someone had truly acknowledged the strength I had within me. I had spent so much time feeling lost, like a victim of my circumstances. But Sarah was right. I was surviving, yes. But I was also beginning to rebuild, to reclaim the pieces of myself that had been buried under years of living for someone else. I wasn't just going through the motions anymore. I was choosing to heal. Over the weeks that followed, I found myself slowly shifting away from the darkness of betrayal. It wasn't that the pain had magically disappeared, but it had started to lose its grip on me. The anger, the sadness, they didn't control me anymore. I was in control of my life, my emotions. And that realization in itself was empowering. One day, I decided to take a step that I had been avoiding for weeks, meeting with a lawyer to discuss the divorce. I had been putting it off, not wanting to confront the finality of it all, but deep down I knew it was time. Noah and I couldn't stay in this toxic space forever. We couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay when it was clear that it wasn't. The meeting was awkward at first, and I struggled to keep my emotions in check. But as I listened to the lawyer explain my options, something clicked. I wasn't just a victim in this situation. I had choices, had power. The divorce didn't have to be the end of my story. It could be the beginning of something new. After the meeting, I sat in my car for a while, taking it all in. This was it. This was the moment where I could truly let go of Noah and start focusing on myself, on what I wanted for the future. I wasn't sure what that future looked like yet, but I knew I had the strength to shape it. In the days that followed, Noah and I had several conversations. Awkward, painful, sometimes even heartbreaking. But they were necessary. He apologized, though his words felt empty, like he was saying what he thought I wanted to hear rather than what he truly felt. I didn't know if I would ever truly believe him again, but I appreciated the fact that he was at least acknowledging the damage he had caused. But as the weeks went by, something strange began to happen. I started to feel a sense of peace. Not with Noah, not yet, but with myself. I wasn't waiting for him to fix this. I wasn't waiting for some magical moment where everything would be made right. Instead, I was slowly realizing that the power to heal was in my hands. And no matter what happened with Noah, I would be okay. As I looked ahead, I knew there would still be moments of doubt, moments of sadness. But I also knew that I was capable of facing them. The future, while uncertain, no longer seemed as frightening as it once did. I had a life to rebuild, and I was ready to embrace it, one step at a time. Strange, the way life can surprise you. It's like one moment everything feels stable, the next, it feels like it's all coming undone. But then, slowly, with time and patience, something miraculous happens. You begin to rebuild, not from the pieces that shattered, but from the strength that you never realized was always inside you. Months passed since I first uncovered Noah's double life. We had filed for divorce, and while the process was anything but smooth, I had finally started to feel a sense of peace in the chaos. The anger and the grief weren't gone. They would never fully disappear, but they no longer held the power to define me. I began to see the world through a different lens. I wasn't a victim of betrayal, but a survivor. I wasn't defined by my past with Noah, but by the woman I was becoming. And for the first time in a long time, I started to see the beauty in the small, everyday things. I'd spend more time with my friends, Sarah especially. I joined a community of women who were healing from toxic relationships, and it was in those spaces that I truly felt seen. I wasn't the only one who had been through heartbreak. I wasn't the only one who had been betrayed, abandoned, or misled. And with every story shared, I began to piece together my own path to healing. Noah's life continued on its unpredictable path, but I no longer spent my days obsessing over it. I had distanced myself enough from him to see the situation clearly. He was still living his double life, still chasing the chaos he had chosen over the stability we once had. But his journey wasn't mine anymore. His mistakes weren't my burden to carry. In some ways, I could almost feel sorry for him. He had built a life filled with lies, a web of deceit that would eventually collapse around him. But the truth was, I didn't have time to feel sorry for him. I had my own life to live, and that was more than enough to focus on. There were days when the loneliness would creep in, nights when I would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'd ever find someone to love again. But then, in the same breath, I would remind myself, love isn't something I need to search for in another person. It's something I needed to nurture within myself first. I found a therapist who helped me understand the deeper wounds I had carried for years. I learned that my dependence on Noah had made me lose sight of who I truly was. I wasn't just his wife, I was me, and that was more than enough. I didn't need someone to complete me. I was already whole. By the time the divorce was finalized, I was no longer the woman I had been when it all started. I was stronger, more self-aware, and ready to take on whatever came next. I had rebuilt my life on my own terms. And I was finally free. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. It wasn't a smooth road to happiness. There were still scars from the past that would always be there, reminders of the pain I'd endured. But I had come out the other side, stronger and more resilient than I ever thought possible. One evening, as I was sorting through some old boxes in the attic, I came across a letter. It was from Noah, written shortly after I had confronted him. I hadn't seen it before. I'd been too wrapped up in the mess of everything to even notice it hidden away in a box of old mementos. I opened it slowly, my hands shaking just a little. The letter was filled with apologies. Some of them felt sincere, others seemed like words he thought I wanted to hear. But what struck me most was the final line. I hope someday you can forgive me. I will always regret what I did to you, but I will never forget how you fought for yourself. You taught me more than you know. The letter was a strange kind of closure. Not the kind I had hoped for. No, I wasn't waiting for Noah to fix what he had broken. But it was a reminder that even in betrayal, there can be lessons. Even in pain there can be growth. I closed the letter and set it aside. I didn't need to keep it. I had forgiven him, not for his sake but for mine. I didn't need his approval or his redemption. I had moved on, and that was the only thing that truly mattered. As the days turned into weeks, I continued to rebuild, to grow, to heal. And somewhere along the way, I realized that the life I had always imagined for myself was not defined by the man I loved or the love that was lost. It was defined by me. By my choices. By my strength. The road ahead wasn't perfect, but it was mine to walk. I didn't know where it would lead, but I knew I had the courage to face whatever came next. And for the first time in a long time I felt hopeful. Hopeful that, even after everything, I was still capable of finding joy, of embracing love. Not the kind that's given to you by someone else, but the kind that comes from within. And that, I realized, was the most important kind of love of all.